Overcrowding on morning trains has slightly reduced according to new Department for Transport figures, but the number of rail passengers on trains overall is now, depending on how you read it, at its highest level since the 1920s. What then are the most crowded trains in England and Wales? Southern Railway's 7:16 a.m. from East Grinstead to London Bridge has that dubious honour, a capacity of 640, but typically cramming in 1,366 passengers into its carriages. Number two, the 7:55 a.m. Cambridge to London's King's Cross, capacity of 202 people, but on average carrying 426. Well, actually carrying that many at its most crowded. Third, the 5:08 from Sutton to St Albans City, meant for a maximum of 391 people, but carrying 758 passengers, very overloaded. Joining us from Kenilworth in Warwickshire is Joe Rukin, National Head of the Stop HS2 campaign. And from our Central London studio, you see there Peter Foster, who's often here as Europe editor of the Daily Telegraph, perhaps more tellingly today, here as a Southern Rail commuter. And we all know what that means, don't we, Peter? In fact, Joe, let's start with you. In terms of these Department of Transport figures, what is catching your eye about these numbers?
I think the thing that catches my eye the most is that the government clearly haven't got the first clue what is going on Britain's railways. Last week, the government issued their predictions for passenger growth in the next 5 years, and they are simply miles out. To give you an example, they said for the next 5 years, passenger numbers into Manchester would go up by 2.2%, so less than 0.5% per year. These figures, it's 7% for 1 year. The same's true of Leeds. They've done a 2.8 prediction for 5 years. So again, about 0.5% a year. It's actually 7.8%. They are absolutely miles out. And that is really important because it's those forecasts that they use to say where they need to invest in Britain's railway.
Joe, where are your corrective figures coming from? Why the discrepancy?
It's well, the government haven't got a clue when it comes to forecasting. This is the HLOS, the high-level output strategy that was produced last week, and they're just miles out. And from my point of view,
Joe,
it's obviously these figures that they're using to say we need HS2.
Because of population growth?
No, because they've got a terrible forecasting model. And they don't use any of the real-world figures to actually factor in to their forecasting model. You know, last week, brilliant example. Passengers are going up massively at Manchester. Chris Grayling said, oh, we don't need more platforms at Manchester. We don't need electrification. And it's these projects that are getting squeezed out to pay for HS2. The vast majority of rail passengers are short-distance commuters who are going to continue to face these crush-hour conditions because the government is betting the farm on HS2 and HS2 only.
All right, let's talk about real-world conditions then. Peter, how's your commute shaping up typically into... Would you go into Victoria?
I go into Victoria when I'm in the UK pretty much every day from the south coast, from Brighton. You know, my complaint is that, you know, this country has a productivity crisis, we keep hearing. I sit on that train for at least 2 hours every day.
You sit? And you get to sit on it?
Well, actually, you know, I get on at the bottom, so I often do get to sit. But most of the time, I don't have a table, I don't have Wi-Fi, and I don't have a PowerPoint. I'd like to see a world where, as more people get forced out of London because of property prices, people like me with families who move down to Brighton and the south coast and all of the places on that line, we should all be working on those trains. Those of us who get seats and tables, we do work. You know, the train is full of people trying to work. But it seems to me, you know, I travel a lot in the continent as the Europe editor of the Telegraph. I don't see, frankly, I'm embarrassed when I watch people get on at Gatwick as I travel into London and they look around the train and they look at it like it's a cattle truck when they're coming in from Europe. You know, it seems to me, you know, that this great vanity project that is HS2, we need to be really careful about what the benefits are of that vis-a-vis fixing conditions now for the thousands of people every day who are commuting into London.
Well, Joe, Peter's done the job for you by mentioning HS2. I mean, you know, you're obviously opposed to it, and I'm guessing that comes with the view that actually the taxpayers' cash would be far better spent on things like the recently cancelled electrification of certain northern routes, the shorter routes as you identify them, rather than, as you also put it, the big vanity project that's HS2.
Well, it's abundantly clear that there are a plethora of small projects that would deliver more benefits to more people more quickly for less money than HS2. But last week, it was very clear when Chris Grayling announced HS2, more announcements with HS2, more spending with HS2. A couple of days later, waiting until Parliament closes, he then announces all of these electrification projects are being cut, and has the audacity to say that bi-mode trains, half diesel, half electric, will give you a better service, when anyone who knows anything about trains knows that they are heavier and they will go slower. And of course, you've just had Michael Gove saying he wants to get rid of petrol and diesel cars, but no, we're going to have more diesel trains. It's bonkers. They haven't got the first clue what is actually happening. They're just wedded to this vanity project.
Joe, just before we leave Chris Grayling, he suggested that we ought to consider culling first-class carriages because they're not as full as standard-class carriages. Would you agree?
Well, we've been saying that for 7 years. We've been saying longer trains, get rid of first class, and better signalling. And it's interesting that the better signalling that was promised, the in-cab signalling on Great Western and East Coast, seems to have died a death. And it's very telling. It's very obvious. Like the one train that you could say that HS2 might alleviate that appears in the top 10 are the London Midlands going out of Euston. And there's one train in the top 10 for both spring and autumn, and it's crowded because it's 8 carriages, but all the other London Midlands are 12 carriages. And it stops at, it's a direct service to Milton Keynes. When it gets to Milton Keynes, it's not crowded at all. It's these short distance commuters that need the investment in the railways.
Peter Foster, we'll always get emails on this subject, and people make a couple of points. They'll say it's a success story, this, and you're talking it down. The numbers of people who are on our railways is at historic highs, and that's wonderful because they're not on the roads. And you'll get other people, and I raised the point right at the start, who will say this is a function of a rapidly growing population. You need to mention that.
Well, those may be the pressures that are on the railways, but let's fix the pressures. You shouldn't need to buy a first-class ticket to get a table, a PowerPoint, and some Wi-Fi. I'm amazed, for example, the new rolling stock that is on the Bedford to Brighton route has no tables. You can't even put a cup of tea down. The way they fix the problem there is to make more standing room. The commuters of this country don't need to stand on hour-long journeys into their workplaces, whether that's in Manchester or London. They need tables, they need PowerPoints, and they need to be working.
Peter, Joe, we've got to leave it there. I really appreciate your thoughts today. Thanks a lot.